Harold would have liked you.
I would have liked him too.
These eggs are actually good, Daniel.
Nice. I told you, Mrs. Cross. I don't play in the kitchen.
My landlady came for rent. I had no money, so I offered her something she never expected, and she broke down in tears story, 1,400 to 1,500 words or USA audience. Daniel never thought the hardest knock he'd ever hear would come from inside his own building. It was a Friday afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the sky turns gray early and the wind cuts through your jacket like it has something to prove. Daniel Hayes, 26, sat at his small kitchen table staring at his phone calculator, running the same numbers for the fourth time, hoping they'd somehow change. They didn't. Rent was due, $850. His account had $73. He'd been laid off from his warehouse job 3 weeks ago. He had 2 freelance graphic design gigs, pending payment, but clients moved slow and landlords didn't. He'd sold his gaming console. He'd skipped meals. He'd done everything a young man with pride and no safety net could do, and it still wasn't enough. At exactly 3 p.m. there was a knock at the door. He already knew who it was. Mrs. Evelyn Cross was 68 years old and had owned this small 4-unit building in Columbus, Ohio for over 30 years. She was a short woman with silver hair always pinned neatly, reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck, and a walk that said she'd seen everything and forgotten nothing. She wasn't mean, but she was firm. Rent was due on the 1st, late on the 2nd. That was the rule, and in 30 years the rule had never changed. Daniel opened the door. "Mr. Hayes." She looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. "Mrs. Cross." He stepped back. "Please come in." She came in, looked around the small apartment, neat despite everything, and sat in the chair he offered her. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Daniel sat across from her. He didn't make excuses. He didn't perform. He just told her the truth. "I don't have the rent, Mrs. Cross. I was laid off. I have 2 payments coming, but I don't know exactly when. I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking for 2 weeks. Her expression didn't change. 2 weeks, she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." Silence. Daniel had prepared himself for the worst, the legal notice, the process, the humiliation of it. He was already thinking about where he'd store his things. Then Mrs. Cross said something he didn't expect. "Is there food in that kitchen?" He blinked. "Ma'am? Food?" She nodded toward the kitchen. "Do you have any?" A pause. "Some rice, a few eggs, some bread." She was quiet again. Then she stood up slowly, smoothed her slacks, and said, "I'll be back in 1 hour," and she left. Daniel sat there for a long time after she walked out. He didn't know what that meant. Was she getting paperwork? Calling someone? He'd heard stories about landlords, how fast things could move once they decided to move. He thought about calling his mother in Cincinnati, but he didn't want to worry her. She had her own bills. He made himself a cup of tea and waited. Exactly 1 hour later, there was another knock. He opened the door and found Mrs. Cross standing there holding 2 large grocery bags. He stared at them. "Don't just stand there," she said. "These are heavy." He took the bags quickly. She followed him inside. In the bags were pasta, canned tomatoes, chicken, vegetables, milk, oatmeal, coffee, and at the very bottom, a small container of homemade cookies wrapped in plastic wrap with a rubber band around it. Daniel set everything on the counter. He turned to look at her and didn't know what to say. "Mrs. Cross, my husband couldn't pay rent once," she said simply. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the groceries like she was remembering something far away. 1987. He just started his own business. We were 3 months behind, on our own mortgage. A pause. Our landlord at the time gave us 30 days and not 1 minute more. We lost everything we had in that apartment, put it all in storage, slept on my sister's couch for 2 months. She turned and looked at Daniel. "I swore if I ever owned a building I would never do that to a person who was trying." The kitchen was very quiet. "Are you trying, Mr. Hayes?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Then 2 weeks is fine." She picked up her purse from the counter. "You don't owe me an explanation every day, just pay when you can." She headed for the door. "Mrs. Cross." Daniel's voice stopped her. She turned. He didn't have a speech. He wasn't good with words when things hit deep. So he did the only thing that felt right. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you have anyone? Family, I mean. Someone who checks on you?" Something moved across her face. Quick, like a shadow. "My son is in Portland. He calls on Sundays." "And the rest of the week?" She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I manage." Daniel nodded slowly. "My grandmother used to live alone. After my grandfather passed, she said the hardest part wasn't the grief, it was the quiet." Mrs. Cross looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "I make a good omelet," Daniel said. "Nothing fancy, but if you ever want to not eat alone on a weekday, my door's open." She didn't take him up on it that day, or the next, but the following Wednesday, there was a soft knock at his door at 11:30 a.m. He opened it and found Mrs. Cross standing there with her reading glasses on her chain and her hands folded in front of her. "I don't like omelets," she said, "but I'll take scrambled eggs." He smiled. Done. She came on Wednesdays after that. They didn't talk about rent. They didn't talk about leases or buildings or business. They talked about her husband Harold, who had loved jazz and terrible puns. They talked about Daniel's design work, which she looked at seriously and said was genuinely good, not just young person good. They talked about Columbus and change and what it felt like to be somewhere for 30 years watching everything around you shift. She brought cookies sometimes. He learned she'd been baking the same recipe since 1979. He got the freelance payments. He paid her back, full amount, both weeks, on a Thursday morning, cash in an envelope, slid under her door with a note that said thank you. Not just for the time, for everything. She never mentioned it. On a cold Wednesday in December, Daniel opened his door and found Mrs. Cross standing there with red eyes behind her reading glasses. "Harold's anniversary," she said. It wasn't an explanation, it was just the truth. "Come in," Daniel said. He made scrambled eggs. She sat at the table. They didn't talk much. The radio played something soft in the background. At some point, she reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. A young couple, laughing, standing in front of a building that Daniel recognized. "That's this building," he said, "the day we bought it." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Harold said it was our future." A long pause. He was right, just not the way either of us expected. Daniel looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at this woman, 68 years old, silver-haired, sitting in his small kitchen on a cold Wednesday, keeping herself together with both hands. "He sounds like he was a good man," Daniel said. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said. And then, quietly, without warning, she put her face in her hands, not loudly, not dramatically, just the soft, private crying of someone who had held it together for a long time and finally found a place safe enough to let it go. Daniel didn't say anything. He just put the plate of eggs in front of her, sat down across the table and stayed. Sometimes that's all a person needs, not solutions, not advice. Just someone who stays. Rent was never late again. But more importantly, every Wednesday, without fail, there were scrambled eggs, an old photograph, and two people who had found in each other something neither one had known they were missing. A landlady who remembered what struggle felt like, a young man who remembered what loneliness looked like, and a kitchen table that became, quietly and without ceremony, one of the warmest places either of them had ever known. Art Eco Story. Stories that touch the soul. Word count, approximately 1,470 words.